A return to the troubles in Northern Ireland. Israel strikes Iranian targets in Syria and mutiny in Venezuela. It's January 22nd, and we'll break it all down here on today's episode of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, every time we think things can't get any worse in Venezuela, they do. But before we get to that though, I just want to give you a quick update on the terror attack that happened in Colombia over the weekend. As I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, the attack that killed 21 people at a police academy graduation ceremony has been blamed on the radical left-wing terror group called the National Liberation Front, or ELN. Now, the group hasn't claimed the attack, but the government's pretty sure they're responsible since the vehicle used in the bombing was from a part of the country where ELN still has several thousand fighters, and it was registered to a known ELN guy. Anyway, those guys have been pretty busy, unlike the larger rebel group that is known as the FARC, which turned in its weapons in 2017 and became a political party. The ELN is still heavily involved in kidnapping and extortion and illegal mining, drug smuggling, murder, and they seem to have a special affinity for bombing Colombia's oil pipelines. Most recently, this week, ELN terrorists bombed the Trans-Andes pipeline, causing an oil spill that fouled a local waterway. This kind of stupidity happens on a better than weekly basis. ELN bombed the pipelines last year 64 times in just 2018 alone. As I mentioned, this isn't an ideological movement. It's a criminal one. And after the horrific bombing last week, the Colombian government is likely to step up its efforts to drive these savages back into the hole they crawled out of. Speaking of savages, another terror group raised its ugly head last Saturday night, this time in Northern Ireland. Members of the Irish Republican Army, which I think most people thought had gone away a long time ago, detonated a crude car bomb in the Irish city of Londonderry. Fortunately, in this case, nobody was hurt, and at least 4 arrests have already been made in the attack. As a matter of fact, they actually warned everybody to get out before they blew the thing up, which is weird. I'm old enough to remember what was called the Troubles, which was several decades of low-grade conflict between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland. It happened between 1969 and 1994, and there were more than 10,000 bombings, which resulted in over 3,500 deaths and nearly 50,000 injuries. Now, several years ago, I went to Northern Ireland to learn more about the Troubles, and I think you'll find the story that I posted from there informative as well.
Belfast is a busy industrial center and the capital of Northern Ireland. Today, this bustling city is best known for its music and nightlife. But before 1997, the sound of gunfire was a nightly occurrence for almost 3 decades. Protestant and Catholic militias made war on each other, engaging in a tit-for-tat killing spree that left over 3,500 dead. David Kidd is native to Belfast and remembers the Troubles well.
I've seen bombs go off. I've had guns pointed at me. I've had people hijack my car. I've had guns put in my mouth.
But contrary to popular belief, David says the war wasn't about religion.
The conflict in Ireland, and Northern Ireland in particular, has always been described as a religious one. The tribal identities are religious, but the issue was about control of the land. It was about economic advantage. It wasn't about inherent religious issues.
In many places around the city, remnants of those old rivalries still exist. In West Belfast, murals commemorate the heroes from various militias. On the Catholic side, neighborhood cemeteries memorialize those killed in the conflict. And separating the two, this 40-foot barrier bears the graffiti of those unwilling to forget the past.
I'm just crossing between the Protestant side and the Catholic side of 2 neighborhoods in Belfast. They're separated by this wall that they call the Peace Wall. These gates are only open during the day, and you'd think since they've had peace since 1994 that this stuff would be ready to come down. But according to a recent survey, that's not the case.
Residents on both sides of the fence say they'd prefer that it stay for now. Old wounds were torn open once again in March, when a faction calling itself the Real IRA killed 2 British soldiers in a drive-by shooting, then killed a policeman 2 days later. I sat down with Major General Tim Cross, a retired British Army officer who spent years in Northern Ireland, to see if he thinks recent killings signal a resurgence of sectarian violence.
I think that's an aberration in the sense that I don't think it's a return to the Troubles. I think it's been a long haul, and there's a generation, 2 generations that have gone through these Troubles, and the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland do not want to go back to the 1970s.
Andrew Rodding is another former British soldier who agrees.
Really, there's no comparison between what it was like before and now. Before there was a threat of violence, now there is no overt threat of violence. So I'm full of enormous hope despite recent killings here, because people have decided they will not go back to what they had before, and for them and for their children, they want a new future of hope.
David Kidd says that fact is an answer to prayer.
Most people expected the loyalist paramilitaries to kill someone in revenge, but thankfully they didn't. After the 2 soldiers were killed and the Catholic policeman, the First Minister, who was a loyalist, the Deputy First Minister from Sinn Féin, and the head of the police force stood on the steps here, and they very strongly condemned the action, and they gave very strong positive leadership to the community. As a result of that, the loyalist paramilitaries did not retaliate for the deaths of the soldiers or the policemen. For the past 400 years, the big tribal identity thing in Ireland has been Protestant and Catholic, and it has been the cause of many conflicts. We now have a political solution that brings those people together, working together, and that has happened because Christians have dealt with the issues and have prayed and made peace happen.
David's church in Belfast is doing just that. Called City Church, this thriving body of believers has grown up in the university district of the city and is well known for attracting new members by way of its award-winning coffee shop. When riots broke out on a street nearby during St. Patrick's Day this year, the church decided to take an active role in making sure that history never repeats itself in Northern Ireland.
We thought, right, what should we do? So what we're going to be doing is, very shortly, we're going to be engaging with every member in that street, knocking on their doors, saying, would you not like now to just do something more positive, to give a more positive feedback into the community? We're going to get together, we're going to do clean the streets, we're going to have music on the streets, just trying to change the negative imagery that often people associate with Northern Ireland to one of positive celebration and joy.
I think despite the tragic events that occurred, the mood of people is very optimistic, because the reaction to the killings was right across the board. Everybody was shocked by it and opposed it, and it has actually brought the community closer together because they realize we cannot go back to that kind of terrorism and that kind of lifestyle. Terrorism and violence can't really work because an eye for an eye makes us all blind, and we have to find a way to live together in peace. And when we work at peace, pray for peace and live for peace, then it is a better way.
Chuck Holton, CBN News, Belfast, Northern Ireland.
An eye for an eye makes us all blind, indeed. This latest bombing didn't cause any casualties, but it would be a mistake to assume the group behind it are just a few local bubbas looking to cause a stir. The group known as the New IRA is a straight-up terror group, and it's perpetrated occasional terror attacks in Northern Ireland all the way back to 1998. The worst of which killed 29 people. Their goal is to make Ireland a separate country, and the whole Brexit debacle playing out right now in the UK just might prove to be the catalyst for more of these kinds of attacks. U.S. intel agencies estimate the New IRA makes about $50 million a year from things like fuel theft and counterfeit cigarettes, so this group is one the Brits are going to have to take seriously. All right, let's move on to Israel. The IDF struck deep inside Syria on Monday to take out several targets they claim to be Iranian assets inside that embattled country. One of the strikes was on Damascus International Airport, which I once got stuck in for a few hours several years ago. Israel claims the Iranians fired a missile at the Golan Heights, which was intercepted by Israel's Golden Dome system.
We have acted with impressive success to block Iran's military entrenchment in Syria, and in this framework, the IDF has attacked Iranian and Hezbollah targets hundreds of times.
And we've talked about Syria a lot, partially because there's not just one conflict happening in that country. In addition to the outright battles against the Islamic State, there's the ongoing conflict between Turkey and the Kurds. There's proxy wars between the United States and Russia, and another proxy war between Iran and Israel. And the potential for shooting the wrong people is tremendous, and it happens often enough that all the various parties have actually set up a party line of sorts to call each other and warn them when a strike is planned. In the case on Sunday, Israel warned Syrian units not to fire at their airplanes as they were striking right in the heart of Damascus. This almost borders on the surreal. I mean, can you imagine calling your sworn enemies on the phone and saying, hey, we're going to hit this target over here, so we're just calling to let you know we're not shooting at you this time. This is called deconflicting the battle space, and it happens all the time. I've seen instances in Iraq where the Kurds would get on the same radio frequencies with ISIS and let them know they were about to destroy a certain compound because they knew the ISIS fighters inside were actually conscripts who really didn't want to be there, or they suspected there might be civilians inside. Just one of those weird things about war in the 21st century. Now, this might be one reason President Trump wanted to get our troops out of this sort of like circular firing squad, but you have to wonder whether Iran would have felt bold enough to launch missiles at Israel if we had not just signaled our desire to leave. Whether that's true or not, Israel's never going to stand by and just let itself get attacked by anybody. But if they get too aggressive with Syria, they always run the risk of sparking an even larger regional conflict, and nobody wants that. The U.S. needs to keep a close eye on Syria, and pulling our forces out is only going to make that more difficult. All right, now on to Venezuela. On Monday, it appears there was an attempted coup, which didn't get very far as a group of National Guardsmen mutinied and stole a cache of weapons, apparently intent on sparking an uprising against Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro. They stole some military trucks and they were headed toward the presidential palace in western Caracas when they were apprehended. At the same time, some videos surfaced on social media of like armed guys, guardsmen I think, encouraging the people to rise up and depose Maduro and his government. It appears they had the support of the opposition-controlled Venezuelan Congress because the Venezuelan Supreme Court then quickly declared that same Congress illegal. This is how it works in Venezuela. So things are getting pretty sporting over there, and even more like The Walking Dead than the last time we reported on it. People are suffering intense hardship without even running water in some places right now. If you ask me, that country can't continue much longer. Now, I've been to the border a couple of times and have watched the country descend to the depths of misery and deprivation that are truly hard to imagine. Venezuela doesn't qualify yet as a true failed state, but what do you call a country where people have eaten all their pets, they're catching pigeons off the roofs to survive, where inflation's topping 1,000,000% per year, and where crime is absolutely off the charts? And it's finally gotten bad enough that the people look like they're willing to lay it all on the line to depose Maduro. It's likely there'll be a huge demonstrations to that effect tomorrow, Wednesday, because that's a special holiday there, and they're calling for these big protests. It wouldn't surprise me if the dictator's regime doesn't last another month. But I've said it can't get worse before, and so far I've always been proven wrong. It almost always can get worse. Now, Maduro's weathered several other attacks on his presidency, like when a drone exploded over the podium where he was speaking at a parade in August of last year. But this time we're seeing a broad international support calling for his ouster, and the U.S. is levying even tougher financial sanctions against Venezuela, which is the right thing to do because every dollar we allow into that country right now is only going to serve to prolong the misery those people are going through. It's time for the Maduro regime to collapse under the weight of its own evil. And even if it does, the damage this period has done to the Venezuelan people, economy, and culture will literally take generations to undo. All right, that's all we have for today, folks. If you've made it this far, you must be liking what we're putting out, so why not go over and subscribe at patreon.com/hotzone. Every little bit helps us, and we'll be sure to show you how your support helps people around the world in times of crisis. Because this podcast isn't supposed to just be about telling you what's happening. I want to give you a way to actually affect what's going on by spreading love directly to the people who need it most. Thanks for being with us. Please share this podcast on your social media circle and leave us a review on iTunes. That helps a ton with the rankings. We'll have another great show for you tomorrow. See you then. I'm Chuck Holton, and this has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.